mystery of water, Dante. And I saw light in the form of a river of fire between two shores, painted with spring's miraculous colors. As if to preserve the complementarity of outward alarm and soul search, the Europe of our travels was racked those years by successive crises, building to the outbreak of the Second War. Weird, after 15th century Bruges, to thread Germany from the night of crystal in Cologne, the streets by scorched synagogues sprinkled with glass, south, through cities aglare with Hitler's rants and rallies, this party night in Nuremberg, to the Tuscan complement of Memling's Bruges, Medici Florence. A staggering contrast, to which, returning through Paris, music would be added, that 8-hour day in the airless listening booth of a record store, when the anthology of sound, Lumen and the rest, would open at last their polyphonic treasures of the Middle Ages and Renaissance. Let what that day began weave into this now the riches of before and after 1500, Europe everywhere rising to its hopeful peak of Christian humanity and charm, Mouton's Nesciens Mater, with the art of the birth in the stable, sung by angels, hailed by shepherds, as we had read it around the Christmas tree from my earliest years. And Mary brought forth her firstborn son, and wrapped him in swaddling clothes, and laid him in a manger, because there was no room for them in the inn. And there were in the same country shepherds abiding in the field, keeping watch over their flock by night. And lo, the angel of the Lord came upon them, and the glory of the Lord shone round about them, and they were sore afraid. And the angel said unto them, Fear not, for behold, I bring you good tidings of great joy, which shall be to all people. For unto you is born this day in the city of David a Savior, which is Christ the Lord. And this shall be a sign unto you. Ye shall find the babe wrapped in swaddling clothes, lying in a manger. And suddenly there was with the angel a multitude of the heavenly host, praising God and saying, Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace, goodwill toward men. And it came to pass, as the angels were gone away from them into heaven, the shepherds said one to another, Let us now go even to Bethlehem, and see this thing which is come to pass, which the Lord hath made known unto us. And they came with haste, and found Mary, and Joseph, and the babe lying in a manger. And when they had seen it, they made known abroad the saying which was told them concerning this child. And all they that heard it wondered at those things which were told them by the shepherds. But Mary kept all these things, and pondered them in her heart. The other face of this early cycle espousal was a first repudiation of the romantic I was rooted in, as if we must practice such a stripping as from ripe Minoan and Aegean to primitive Greek. In a poem written at an Oxford concert, 1939, I muse, like some future Dark Age scop, so the author of the Anglo-Saxon ruin, well wrought this wall stone, broken by weird, the work of giants is crumbling, I wrote. When these walls ivy-covered stand in ruins, grey to the night of faintly altered stars, and men beholding strike the savage harp, and sing the work of heroes, giants of old, they will not know that in this crusted hall, where music wails the spectre of a rose, a man of peace, leagued with an age of wars, welcomed destruction, famine, and the plague, to find again strength without compromise. As if cultures could go on forever, with Trojan wars and barbarian renewals, though our own war and the ecology crisis have spelled out what we might have foreseen, that now the globe is at stake, world melt or melt down. So even during the war, and in a place no more scenic than Iowa, the spring of 1943 called me from Augustinian wisdom to a celebration of nature, not simply a romantic return. What sustains this patterned evening is the organizing physics of entropic up against down. Image of the world mirrored to all time, clouds, winds, and waves of light, senselessly beautiful, moved by the force that moves, borne down the stream, flung from the high to low, seeking repose, and birds, bearers of life, that sing and soar, fired with a godlike will, breasters of the wind, beating bold wings up a torrent sky, feeding the sweet blaze of eternal desire. Princeton would have seemed a motion back to the closures of East, from Emerson to Hawthorne, with sin and psychosis. Thus, in Savoldo's 1530 Temptation, St. Anthony, headed for that nature Renaissance has opened, turns in terror back to a Bosch pursuing nightmare. As I wrote on a conference of atomic scientists, still mad Prometheans, or broken drudges working death's weapons, irrelevant what cause, so all props prove at last abortive, built of the crumbling tough. Such the departmental gab and hollowness, smart erosion of honesty and courage, from which I did well to be fired, leaving the old life behind me. Or was escape an illusion? Had not Turner been driven a century and a half before from the calm irradiation of an early oil sketch along the Thames to the apocalyptic expressionism of this late death on a pale horse? The polarities had been dangerously entangled since Blake's Marriage of Heaven and Hell, or as he would say, since the creation, which was the fall. Yet it was from Princeton that I received the great Europeans, great Germans, one might say, but they were Jews. Erich Kahler, wisest of them really, humanitarian, philosopher, historian, whom I described in his Festschrift, pacing the room, pulling his hair, talking of transcendence, while insights opened and spread around me like realms of light, for there is no one else that can talk like Erich Kahler. And for an American power, the closest of my students, Galway Kinnell, here clubbed by police at the Selma March, wakes in the arms of a black Madonna. How death crowds in his love poems. I touch your face, I move my hand over slopes, falls, lumps of sight. What the old Goya, more than a century before, sought in the form of a nude, her lights drawn by water dropped on blackened ivory, a cheekbone, a curved piece of brow, a pale eyelid afloat in the dark, and now I make out an eye, dark, wormed with far-off, unaccountable lights. Like Kokoschka's 1914 Tempest Love for Alma Mahler, and now the day, raft that breaks up, comes on. I think of a few bones floating on a river at night, the starlight blowing in place on the water, the river leaning like a wave toward the emptiness. Yet all of these, heirs to Isolde's Liebestod, affirm whatever brings us to this brunt. Even Miro, in his 1938 self-portrait, as he melts into shapes of earth and sky, Kinnell, how many nights have I lain in terror, O Creator Spirit, maker of night and day, only to walk out the next morning over the frozen world, hearing under the creaking of snow faint, peaceful breaths, snake, bear, earthworm, ant, and above me a wild crow crying, yaw, 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 from a branch nothing cried from ever in my life. So I came back to the Chicago of my youth to teach in Hutchins University, where anti-fascist exile Giuseppe Antonio Borghese loomed large. He had written in 3 languages a poem of his life, Easter Sunday, 1945. The Italian boyhood took the classical style of Manzoni, to be imaged wherever that dream has fructified, from Claude to Dutch Hobbema's Poplar Avenue. In music, let it be Casals, Boccherini. O Sicilia, o Toscana, ove sostai fanciullo, o dolce pian di Lombardia, as translated, O Sicily, O Tuscany, where I paused in boyhood, O sweet Lombardy plain, measured by mulberry trees, fanned by the feathers of poplars, where no more I tread your ways, lifting my eyes to townships brown along your hills, or coming home to trusty evenings, seeking the marble pinnacles of Milan, softened by the breathing of the meadows, where the cloud lingered, now no more, non più. Dich nicht, Deutschland, Erde meiner zweiten Frühe. The German student wanderings take the language of Goethe and Hölderlin, here with Schumann, Karus, Richter, Blechen. Germany, land of my second prime, where clear streams rushed through the fragrant darkness of the night, the slowly yielding woodland night, and flowers, geraniums, from balconies at morning, laughed like 1,000 girls, but I went lonely, wandered from ridge to ridge, climbing bell towers of immemorial red, listened to music enclosed in depths, and with my loving eyes held that strange beauty, now no more, die fremde Schöne mit verliebtem Auge fasste, nicht mehr, o Tenebrae, O Akeldama. In the last section of his poem, Borghese, in wartime America, forges an English out of Shakespeare and the modern. Thus Rembrandt's A Slaughtered Ox, as symbolic as realistic, has variously informed our century. Here, in 1926, before the rise of Hitler, Soutine's existential reminder already distills Holocaust. By Chagall's 1947 ox lapping its own blood, Holocaust was real. But the alarm of the night town, the celestial warning voice, weave a crucifixion magic around Nazi Europe and the trial of the Jews. And in Chagall's Falling Angel, variously painted from 1923 to 1947, as in the elegy from Bartók's Concerto for Orchestra, or the close of Borgese's Easter poem, disaster, flames, affirmation. You passers-by who stop and wonder what I in uncommuning sounds lament, it is as if I had left home at noon and looked homeward before sundown. I see the barns aflame, the house a rump, the trees writhing in desperate embraces. Death with claws of strangling smoke grips ground and air. The silence is one shriek. one chasm the paths, so let me step westward. My shadow is long. In unmediated transcendence, that striding shadow is cast exactly by the burning world past. My shadow is long. Has Borghese, secretary of Hutchins' committee to frame a world constitution, editor of its magazine Common Cause, veered here from planned reconstruction to an avant-garde firework affirming the negative itself, that blaze of world destruction? Any such antinomy, form against flux, man's stable earth against apocalypse, fuses in the actual. When Borghese read that poem, so deeply rooted in its languages, yet so voiced that all languages sounded like Italian, I sensed some modern liberation of dissonance and flame. Yet the Roman will of that thrust-out lip, the conscious command of tradition and form, decried the hermetic shell game of modernity. It was Farinata who had raised himself up. Vedi là, Farinata, che sei dritto. Remembering my summer with the embattled Irish at Black Mountain, where Albers and his followers were pursuing what would become this homage to the square, I wrote, "The modern abstract has been the expression of man reduced from humanity to function or confronted with that reduction, of nature desiccated out of organic interplay to symbolic paradigm. It abandoned space-time for the boom of the Marabar caves. In opposition to this, the new organic reaffirms the meaningful concordances of spirit and matter, of world and man." An affirmation for which Jim Gilbert, teaching at Chicago with me, became my art example, as in his Prairie and City Nudes, though he deplored historical programs. As for the abstract, I had long felt the beauty of Gödel's proof, to float mathematics again on paradox, the suspension of its axiomatic claims, and not simply the beauty of that result, but of the very proof, of abstraction trained to reflect on and delimit itself. Yet what were the abstractions of Albers proving? Meanwhile, de Kooning, rendering Angel and Marsh, spread an action-painting wing of the New York school Flight, an energy released by the dissolution of forms. Had not Plato ironically toyed with the euphoria of flux? Socrates. Their first principle is that there is nothing but motion. Everything is becoming and in relation, and being must be altogether abolished. Thus, in the language of nature, all things are coming into being and passing into new forms, nor can any name fix or detain them. O Theaetetus, are not these speculations sweet as honey, and do you not like the taste of them in the mouth? With such modern excitement, I too had risked, from my youth, a dialectic of paradox, though my aim was to enlarge reason, as Socrates did by sophistic contradiction. And there I found myself by the windy shore of the century of progress fair, breasting Whitman's oceanic amplitude and rush of these great cities, I teaching with humanities and history art appreciation, especially of the modern. From our leaded Tudor panes, we could look across to Wright's Roby House, or visit with friends the one he built for his cousin near Libertyville, to take the thrill of those spaces, to affirm again the daring of the West, the present wonder of the world, in the glow of German Goethe, Schelling, and the music of Beethoven, to span the global reach of Adlai's speeches, the Marshall Plan recovery of Europe, what seemed the geniality of British socialism, the advancing American pursuit of rights, to plant that leaven of hope, though in the stubborn dough of Cold War, Korea, cyclical history, the Greek tragedy and Thucydides I was teaching. Such was the crucible of De Retro al Sol, affirmation of tragic America. Its title from Dante, Ulysses, to sail beyond the sunset. That paean to the mad flight, il folle volo, that took him under. The sea closed over us as it pleased another. On that peak and defile, our freedom aimed at Vietnam, our boom at ecology crisis, my art class was responding to the new architecture, as Georgia O'Keeffe had in her New York phase, the explosion of materials, the phenomenal expansion of powers, as from the 1860s wrought iron reading room of the National Library in Paris to Nervi's post-war palace of work, here being built in Turin. I was tracing from the 19th century the interplay within a continuing polarity, a straight-lined functionality as of Bauhaus, rooted far back in the Scott Mackintosh, Hofmann in Vienna, here the skeletal steel of Chicago's Sullivan and Adler. At the other extreme, the fancy of organic growth, sprung like Jack's beanstalk, though not overnight, Gaudi's 300-foot stone towers of the Barcelona Church of the Sacred Family, begun in 1891 and still to be completed. So to Frank Lloyd Wright's synthesis and transcendence of the poles, here, in what he was then designing, this Philadelphia synagogue, defying, as it were, all deaths by war and holocaust, one of which Dylan Thomas had refused to mourn. Never until the mankind-making, bird-beast and flower-fathering and all-humbling darkness tells with silence the last light breaking, and the still hour is come of the sea tumbling in harness, and I must enter again the round Zion of the water bead, and the synagogue of the ear of corn, shall I let pray the shadow of a sound, or sow my salt seed in the least valley of sackcloth to mourn the majesty and burning of the child's death. So the fall of 1951 brings me to my own poem, Beyond the Sunset, with Beethoven and a whole horizon of art. Driven home along the outer drive from a wine tasting in the Electric Club by the fearless skill of Elizabeth Mann Borghese, I sat at my desk, just able with so much tasting to hold the pen. But this is what I scrawled. Over the gulf and soaring of the city, we came at dusk to the roof garden rail. Darkness flowed in the streets. The sheer beauty of towered steel rose in the violet air, bands and heights of light under the sky's plumes. Cars to the suburbs burn the long road lanes. Delaunay's 1910 Eiffel Tower had expressed the ecstasy which would lead Frank Lloyd Wright, after 2 wars, to conceive his still unbuilt mile-high sky city, charged with Icarian overweenings, tandem cab, ratchet-guided, atomic-powered elevators. Here on the terrace, drinking wine and eating, people of every nation, hearts unquelled by the encroaching shadows, mingle, speaking tongues of kindred lands. Their voices tell of customs and of needs, of the fools who rule. They are loose in talk and laughter, slurs and dreams. How my Dionysiac poem, beyond conscious programs of world rescue, kindles a pyre of fatal celebration, while from the luminous rapture of Delaunay's 1912 City of Paris, Gilbert caught a vision of such Cézanne nudes over prairie, bridged river, cliffs like roofs of Chicago. And the clouds relinquish the sun's brown setting Twilight deepens as the city glows. Out of the past of another world evening, spirit has suffered, a great voice looms. It is Pericles, with Athens at the bourne of her adventurous sailing into ruin. We are the school of Hellas. Wonder unending of after ages will be ours. We have made sea and land the highway of our daring. If now, obedient to the general law, we invite decay, the greatness we have known will be some break of beauty in that gloom. Mies van der Rohe, already raising his towers of steel and glass in America. These words echo in the mind, from dark flashing along the grey shore and the wash of waves, towers and cars streaming, up vibrant air reaching, cones of light catch at the destined plains, the roar west and east. Here in the hum of mingled voices, careless freedom sings. And we too have lived the dayspring and daring, which all time will remember. We have seen over the earth foreclosure of our wasting, still the incredible brightening of the dream. Now promise is almost presence under the dome of night, stirred with light and the rush of wings. Since the poem is elegiac, I have let it speak, though its pathos was the flaw of the vision. Adler's rhetoric had no escape from bastion enterprise with the hot careers of Cold War. So a sequel would attend a later visit, a conversation with a mannequin in a shop window. Chicago, 20 years after. The city always taller over the shore. The sirens of its promise heavier. I almost caught in the dream rush as before. Ask the mannequin, whose mythic hair slogans a costly tweed, was the western star we pledged with life, tinsel as you are? Smile.